But
the anti-genocide protests at Columbia
Kim
University.
Iverson.
Someone explain to me how this is any different
Kim
than what
Iverson.
has happened to the
She's
J6
one
protesters.
of the
and
many.
Many of you might combat that and say, no,
Sources I follow.
because it's terrorism. But what is the exact difference?
Because
That is exactly what
she's
liberals claimed. Is that
proven herself to be honest
were taking over
and
the Capitol.
have some.
Are you a yo-yo dieter? You diet, you lose weight, and then you gain it all
then
back.
we do
plus a few
this.
extra pounds, and later
But
you lose
I
it,
get you gotta do what you gotta do.
Well, that's dangerous. Studies show that can increase your risk of heart. Has its own Twitter account or X account or whatever, and they put this out. Shalom Muhammad. ICE proudly
But she's proven
Khalil,
to have
a
some
radical foreign pro-Hamas student
ethics
on the campus of Columbia University.
in her past actions. I mean, as usual, I don't agree with everything she says. You know, but I rarely agree with everything anybody says, and I think we all rarely agree with anything anybody says, with everything anybody says. But she's got a good breakdown of the recent political theater that just went on. So, I gotta get moving. I'm feeding the animals now. That's why I've got the gloves on. I gotta separate some chicken. But, she's got a good breakdown of what just went on. And makes some very good points about the whole situation. So, I got some comments on this. Well, I'm still working this stuff out.
To Hamas. Now remember, whenever you're looking at these types of situations, you always, and we'll go over a situation like this here in a second, another protest that I am personally not on the side of the protesters at all, but I believe in the American right to protest. And not just the American right of, because I'm a U.S. citizen, I have the
free
right.
speech,
but the
people.
right on
They're
US
trying
soil
to
protest,
take
even
it.
if you're not an
They're
American
trying
citizen.
to get you on
And
board
this
with
gentleman
getting rid
is
of free speech
U.S.
here.
green card holding citizen. He is married
Both
to
sides
he's a U.S.
are trying to get you comfortable with the lack of free, with the crackdown on free speech.
That's going to be born in 1 month. So he has an American wife, an American child. He himself is a green card holder. He should be afforded all the same rights as especially when it comes to free speech. That is what we pride ourselves on here in the United States. That is one of our main rights that keeps us a democracy, and rather than reeling into an authoritarian system where you can't criticize the government, you can't criticize authority. So here Trump puts out a statement. Trump's statement on this, this is what he says. Following my previously signed executive orders, ICE proudly apprehended and detained Mohammed Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. This is the first arrest of many to come. We know there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, anti-American activity, and the Trump administration will not tolerate it. Many are not students, they are paid agitators. We will find, apprehend, and deport these terrorist sympathizers from our country, never to return again. If you support terrorism, including the slaughtering of innocent men, women, and children, your presence is contrary to our national and foreign policy interests, and you are not welcome here.
And what do you call
America's colleges and
what Israel is doing?
Thank you.
For Pete's sake, they're slaughtering an entire
fascist,
country of people.
I mean, that's what this is. Whether you supported Donald Trump or not, you have to admit that this is highly
with bombs that we pay for,
authoritarian and completely antithetical to the concept of free speech. These people are protesting, and now they're being protesters. It doesn't matter what your personal feelings are. What matters is we have rights in this country, and those rights are free speech, and the right to protest, and the right to protest our leaders, and the right to speak up and say we don't agree with the happenings of a foreign country, of all things on top of it. But very specifically, you're not allowed to protest a foreign government, Israel. That's who you're not allowed to protest. My guess is, had this guy been out there protesting the NCAA and their allowing of trans, male athletes to go to the my guess is he would have been applauded and be told that he's a hero.
What if he'd been doing a pro-Ukrainian protest? You think he'd be
Israel?
Get deported for that?
In our country, and potentially deported, never to see his wife and child again, unless they go to Palestine, where we're bombing Palestine. So him and his wife and his child might get murdered. American citizens murdered by American bombs, used by Israel, and that's the fate that we're putting on this person for advocating for his people as a U.S. green card holder, advocating for the Palestinians to not be genocided. That's what he was advocating for.
Yeah, exactly.
And people want to categorize that and say, no, that's Hamas activities. You're tied to Hamas. You're tied to Hezbollah. And you've got to prove that in court. You've got to prove that he was actually
protesting
a militant member
the rape
of Hamas,
and murder
or a militant
of
member
his
of
people.
Hezbollah, or providing
Literally.
weapons and material support to them in some way. You cannot just categorize anything you don't like when it comes to Palestine as just Hamas. But that is what's happening under the Trump administration. So this whole notion of there was going to be free speech under the Trump administration and finally the days of political persecution are over, that is not what we're seeing here. We're seeing clear violations of that claim that this was going to be the party of free speech. This is not. It's the party of the speech they want. And if you are against that speech, and or
Elon
there's some
Musk
things
has
they don't like,
proven
they
that
will lock you up.
repeatedly.
And they will throw you out of the
Anything
country
that
if they can.
criticizes
Now, they know
him
they can't
gets
actually get away with this
deleted.
when it comes to American citizens. And if they think that this is going to somehow curb the activities of these protests, they're wrong. This is just meant to send a message. And if you think it's going to stop at green card holders and non-citizens, you're wrong in thinking that. It begins here. And then you're next as an American citizen, not allowed to protest against your own government, against a foreign government, without potentially losing everything and being locked up. The pro-Jewish Israeli Zionist lobby wants, and if they're sitting there saying any sort of protest against Israel is now anti-Semitism against all Jews, they got what they paid for. I mean, this is what $250 million will buy you. But when Trump says here, I want to point this particular sentence out, what he says, we know that there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terrorist. What is pro-terrorist activities? When he says they have engaged in pro-terrorist activities, you have to define what terrorism is, and no one's really been able to do that very clearly. Everybody's a terrorist. Oh, you're a Catholic.
Everything they don't like is terrorism. She makes that point, I think.
PTA, you're a terrorist. I mean, if you're anti-COVID mandates, you're a terrorist. You're a J6 protester, you're a terrorist. You're MAGA, you're a terrorist. You see how this word is used? That's why you can't let your personal emotions get in the way of whether or not a protest.
Terrorism is a boogeyman.
You have to just say all protests, whether I like them or not.
Terrorism is a boogeyman. Just the way Russia's always been a boogeyman.
Violate laws
Something
in this
to
country.
scare you into telling the
Because
lie.
they're not charging him with any criminal laws, and that's how you know that he did not actually commit a crime. He didn't hit anybody, hurt anybody, assault, harass, or actually give military support or serious crime. The government would be using criminal law to go after him. This is also evidenced by the nebulous language the government is using. Khalil engaged in activities aligned to Hamas. What does it mean to be aligned to Hamas? The evidence to date suggests that this simply means he believes in Palestinians' right to self-determination, as again he has provided material support to terrorism or the like. He would be prosecuted under the applicable law. Members of the Trump admin made clear that they intend to use all means at their disposal to silence protected pro-Palestine speech, and they are making an example of Khalil in a particularly gratuitous act of cruelty. The government transferred him to a facility in Louisiana, presumably so his 8-month pregnant wife cannot easily visit him, and likely also in hopes of getting before a more favorable, read conservative, judge. This should really outrage the entire pro-free speech crowd. This is not what you voted for, I don't think. Unless you voted for free speech for me and not for thee. Congressman Mike Lawler, let me actually show you that
stay right where you're at while I'm doing it, okay?
Congressman Mike Lawler put this out. He says, this is great news. He's a congressman of New York.
Don't get in the way.
It's long past time to restore order and uphold the integrity of America's higher education. And he put it with this image that he also created. ICE arrests Palestinian leader of Colombia's anti-Israel protests, revoking student visa and green cards. So at least down on might as well say it for what it is.
No, they're not.
President Trump's crackdown on protests.
They're not cracking down on arrest. They're cracking down on dissent.
And I feel bad for those of you that did.
They're cracking down on people who don't agree with the party line.
I didn't vote
That's
for him
what's
because
going
I
on.
suspected this type of thing would happen. Well, he clearly said it in his campaign speech, and I believed him. I mean, that's what
And it's not the party line you think it is.
And immigration attorney I trust and have some dealings with.
All right, YouTube, just calm down for a minute. We're not there yet.
Yes, and this is what the immigration attorney said. Says it is very scary territory. The State Department can't revoke someone's green card. America has a free speech for all policy. That is what we stand for as a country. That's how we criticize other countries who crack down on protesters, do not allow dissent in their nations. We say this is an anti-Western value. We don't just say, look, only for those on American soil who happen to also be American citizens, which, by the way, the Constitution applies to everybody standing on American soil. So even if you're not a U.S. citizen, if you're here, you are subject to our laws. That is true anywhere in the world. If you are going to the country, a foreign country, you're subject to their laws, and while you're on their soil, you have to abide by their laws. You don't get to walk around with your American passport saying, but I'm an American, I've got extra special privileges here, I've got my American rights. That's not really true. And the same, it's vice versa. And we say to these other countries, you are not upholding what we consider to be democratic values. Well, what are democratic values? And I know we use that to weaponize in order to topple governments and whatnot, but let's just look at it for, if we actually meant it. We actually would say to we believe in democracy and a free people, and we want you to, we're going to criticize that you don't have a democracy or a free people.
All right, Juno, come on.
Right, fair enough. So what are we doing? What are we doing here with this?
Juno,
you're not a free person if you're in the United States and you're not a U.S. citizen.
Go. You know the routine.
That is not what we believe.
There you go.
All people, regardless
no,
of their
don't go back there.
of
You're going to end up
where they
there.
come from, where they stand, they should have the right to protest and the right to dissent, and especially against a foreign government. People then also commented saying things like, well, we don't like people who hate America. I'm sorry, he's protesting Israel. Since when did you conflate the two? Oh, right, you've been gaslit because so many of you are already conflating the two. Israel and the United States are not the same country. And push comes to shove, Israel will look out for itself. It won't look out for us when times get tough. If it has to choose between itself and us, it's choosing itself. We should maybe do the same thing and uphold our own values. And what kind of an ally with Western values is telling us to crack down on these protests anyway? And why are we even doing it? Very, very scary. Do not like to see this. We'll continue to follow the case and criticize it, quite frankly. Another alarming event that happened over the weekend. Another alarming event that happened over the weekend. It's another crackdown on protests that I've seen. This is J.D. Vance. So J.D. Vance says, today while walking my 3-year-old daughter, a group of Slava-Ukraini protesters followed us around and shouted as my daughter grew increasingly anxious and scared. I decided to speak with the protesters in the hopes that I could trade a few minutes of conversation for them leaving my toddler alone. Nearly all of them agreed. It was a mostly respectful conversation, but if you're chasing a 3-year-old as part of a political protest, you're a shit person. I had to go and protest the children of a politician, then yeah, you're probably not, you don't have any ethics or morals. But to me, that would mean you're literally you're showing up at their school, as a prop, you're harassing the children. So you are seeking out the kids, and you're protesting in front of the children specifically, not the vice president or leader of a country that is very politically charged, that is very divided. You could just expect that every day there's probably going to be protesters. That's just part of the job, actually, and that's part of being an American. Americans are allowed to protest, and you're a political person, so people are probably going to protest you. And so what are you doing walking your 3-year-old? That, to me, is a bit, quite frankly, irresponsible. Now, is it, sure, should the 3-year-old be able to have a life where she can walk with her dad? Yes, but her dad chose to become vice president of the United States. So your dad made the choice to become a politician and knew what the consequences would be and what life would be like. Do you think it's really safe, in your opinion, for a 3-year-old? We could flip this around a bit. Should a 3-year-old be surrounded by men with guns at all times? Because that's what's happening. Secret Service is surrounding J.D. Vance and the 3-year-old. Should children be subject to guns, being surrounded by men with guns every single day? Do you think that's frightening? It's the choice he made when he became vice president of the United States, when he decided to become a politician. These are the sacrifices that he made. He put those sacrifices on his family. His children will not have normal childhoods in any stretch of the imagination, even if they never saw a protest. The children of the Vice President of the United States of America would not have normal childhoods. It's just not going to happen. They're going to have very different, and for many, envious childhoods. So for him to think...
And here I'd like to say that kids don't know what normal childhoods are. Adults do, but you really don't. Kids don't know what a normal childhood is. What kids know is the childhood they have. That's all they know. I mean, they can read about it and hear about it, but what they really know is what they are living. They don't know what a normal childhood is. You don't know what a normal childhood is and realize how fucked up your childhood actually was until you're about 30 and have been out in the world and talked to people. Then you realize how fucked up your childhood was, if it was, or how good your childhood was. What you know up to that point is your childhood. So, get past normal childhood and let kids have glorious, decent, trouble-free childhoods instead of what we impose on them as normal. Just a sidetrack.
Think that he could just walk his for one, he says walking my 3-year-old like she's a dog, but walking with his 3-year-old, he had a stroller, so he's pushing his 3-year-old in a stroller. I mean, for him to think that he could walk around without protesters in public is, to me, but beyond asinine thinking. I mean, if you're a politician, come on, give me a break. That's like a celebrity being like, I just want to be able to go outside and not have paparazzi.
Yeah,
oh, you're going to get paparazzi everywhere you go. Now, there are rules. They can't publish the images of your children, but they are allowed to take pictures of you with your kids. That's what paparazzi do. You cannot use your children as human shields, which is essentially what J.D. Vance did here. He was using his child, and I'll show you the evidence. This is what he's conveying is not what happened. And that, to me, is also the scariest part about this. The real scary takeaway of his tweet here, and him trying to say, these protesters were chasing my 3-year-old, is he's trying to get you to to basically be against protests, to be against these protesters. And to want to limit their activities. This is another crackdown on protests that the administration doesn't like. And the way they're trying to get you on that is by throwing a 3-year-old at you. Is by saying, but the 3-year-old.
Yeah,
have
the
some
3-year-old.
decency. They weren't showing up to the preschool. And let me just show you where they were. J.D. Vance's house is back along that road in the back. And let me just show you the full screen here. So these protesters, the police had blocked off that street, so no one's allowed to even go back to where his house is. The protesters were standing on the corner of the street protesting. They were not chasing him around, harassing his 3-year-old. He would have to go to them in order to get harassed by these protesters. He would have to have actively taken his 3-year-old and put that 3-year-old in this situation. His choice to do that, knowing that there were protesters there. These people didn't just pop up. But he wanted to take his 3-year-old on a walk.
This is PR, people. She's right about this. It's to engender a hatred of protest. It's to automatically draw a line between protest and not socially acceptable. And they reach to do it. This is a glaring example of PR, propaganda by another name.
And he wanted to, so that he could put this tweet out there for what? Now, I don't even agree with these protesters because I'm not on the side of Slavia, Ukraine. You know, I want to see the end of the war. I'm not on their side. But I am on their side as Americans, or even as just people in America and their right to protest. And if they and that is the job. If you accept the job as VP, you're going to be protested for a voice. But
and if you expect anything else, you're plain stupid.
Is the fact that
okay?
J.D. Vance has been able to rile up the base, the conservative free speech base. Once again, that Trump the Trump admin said they were all about, and then Trump says we've arrested these protesters. And people now that said they were free speech are cheering. These people are now cheering crackdowns on free speech. And J.D. Vance saying, my 3-year-old, you're chasing a 3-year-old as part of a political protest or a shit person. And people are like, yeah, shut down these protests. This is a way, it's an emotional way to get people to go along with quite an authoritarian position, which is we don't want to see these protests at all.
He had to take the 3-year-old out to them. They didn't come to the 3-year-old. All right? He used his child as a prop. Just the same way the Democratic, who's ever calling the strings in the Democratic Party, used Joe Biden as a living Ken doll for the last, 4 years. They are using people. He's using his 3-year-old for this.
Now let me show you this video here, because this proves that JD was actually completely exaggerating the situation in order to get you to want to crack down on protesters. So just so you know what we're looking at here, this is JD Vance. See how these protesters are very calm. They're listening to him. He's talking. And he's basically, and I respect him for this a lot. This part I like. I like a lot that JD Vance went down there and he decided to talk to the protesters. And you don't really see that much from a politician where they actually engage with the protesters. This should be commended. This is very American of him. This is what we want
if
to
it
see
was
from
done
politicians.
for the reason of trying to understand the protest, yeah, that would be true.
And we can actually see in this video, they weren't doing that. They were protesting.
But he didn't do it for that reason. He didn't do it to hear the protesters out. He did it so he could encounter the protesters. That's it. With his 3-year-old.
On the corner, as we saw in the last video. He's now talking to them. And they actually do agree.
Battery gave out, so I had to change it. We're going to try a different angle on things here. Because I won't know what any of this looks like until I look at it later. And I'm not going to have a time to look at it anytime soon.
Was meant to get you to want to crack down on protesters. It's meant to get you.
And I don't know how much of this you were hearing either. It's well worth going and watching the whole clip from Kim Iverson. I'm going to post it on Fed Up with Fear, and it's well worth watching and considering and thinking about. Because she makes some very valid points here.
And they agreed at the end. They agreed. Now, they were not chasing his 3-year-old, harassing his 3-year-old. He do it, I'm sure you got a nanny, or whatever, or just don't do them and play inside instead. And, that's the job. And I feel bad for the kids that have to grow up that way because especially at 3-year-old.
How many other politicians manage to keep their kids away from protesters?
President of the United States, that doesn't really quite register, but when they're older, they'll be really proud that the fact that they're.
How many other politicians manage to keep their kids out of the media?
Because what Trump is doing and what J.D. Vance did by claiming, these protesters are shit people. This is a crackdown on a fundamental, sacrosanct American value, which is free speech. And we absolutely have to guard that free speech with our lives. We have to guard it with our lives if it comes down to it. And that's got to be free speech no matter what the speech is. Whether you like the speech, you like the protest, or you don't agree with it, you don't agree with the protest, we have to protect that right. Because that right keeps us a free people. And this administration, over the weekend, has, quite frankly, very much frightened me when it comes to the protection of our free speech rights. This was just a clip from the full Kim Iverson show, which is Monday through Friday, 5 p.m.
And it should frighten you.
Eastern. Head to KimIversonShow.com.
Because that was a very clear, orchestrated situation. Why did he walk down there with his 3-year-old? If he wanted... You didn't know the protesters were down at the end of the corner? Seriously? Why do you take your 3-year-old down that way? Why didn't you go the opposite direction? Why didn't you go play in the backyard? Which would probably have been more fun. You know, there are any number of things that he could have done with his child at that point in time, other than taking her down and parading her in front of the protesters, who obviously didn't do anything. This is why you got to go back and look at raw footage of things. Because everything you see in media nowadays is shaped and molded to keep up appearances. And they're getting sloppy about it now. So look at this situation for what it really is. Orchestrated to create fear and hatred